I'm not one of those facilitators who spend a lot of time at the beginning of the workshop shaping up group agreements, but I do think there are times where getting explicit about expectations is really important. But far from just having a list of rules or a list of guidelines, I think it's important that you shape up the agreements with participants and you do it in a way that makes sense for the people and the context of the workshop. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 different ways of addressing the group agreement question. And with a few tweaks, these 3 methods can be used just about anywhere. Hi, I'm Kerry Price. I'm the founder of the Facilitators Network, and I use the principles of deliberate generosity to make sure that no meeting or workshop is ever wasted. I've been a professional facilitator for 20 odd years, and in that time I've led thousands of meetings, workshops and community conversations. Nowadays, I help other trainers and facilitators do it well too. Working with adults is weird because on one hand, you want to believe that most people are good humans and they're going to show up in a way that is helpful for the group. But on the other hand, we know that sometimes that's not always the case. And while it's possible to call out crappy behavior without having group guidelines in place, it's certainly much easier to address those behaviors if you've already got some agreements lined up right from the beginning. So in this video, I'm going to share 3 activities that help you form some group agreements in different ways so that you have the right activity for every context. Activity 1 is called Take a Bet on Yourself. And this is a super simple way to share expectations with the group. And honestly, I use it in about 95% of my workshops. So for context, before I get to this part in the workshop, I've already done an exercise with participants so that we are clear about what people are expecting from the session. What do they need to get out of it in order for the workshop to be a success? Once they've shared that, I share these expectations, acknowledging that I'm not the only person responsible for making the workshop a success. So the group agreement sounds something like this. It's my intention that today we cover off all of the things that you've just shared and that today is useful and not just interesting. However, I'm only partly responsible for the success of this session. If you want this session to be a success as well, then there's 3 things that I need from you. The first is I need you to be open-minded. So that means today people are going to share different things. I might share different things that rub up against what you already believe to be true. In those moments, the invitation is to be open-minded. Now that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to agree. It doesn't mean that you have to take everything that I or someone else says as gospel, but it does mean that you have to be open-minded enough to take it on board, mull it over, think about how it might work in your context, and at least for the purpose of today, take it on board with an open mind. If you take it back to work, give it a try and it doesn't work, then that's fine, toss it out. But at least for the purpose of today, be prepared to be open-minded. And then I check in with the group. Is everyone okay that we can be that? And I invite a thumbs up or a nod or some sort of acknowledgement that I haven't just said it, but they actually agree. If I'm facilitating this activity online, I have little cards written, be open-minded, to put a visual to the statement. If I'm in person, I'll write it up on the corner of the whiteboard. So that's the first part. That's the B in B.E.T. Be open-minded. The second part of the group agreement is E. And that is an invitation for people to engage in the process. I explained to participants that this workshop has been designed for contribution and not just consumption, which means it's only going to work if you actively engage with what's going on. I explained that sometimes I'm going to be explaining why we're doing something in a particular way, and other times I'm going to invite them to do something that might feel clunky or uncomfortable, but there is a method to my madness. The invitation is for people to lean in and engage in the process anyway, just to see what falls out. Just like I did with Be Open-Minded, I invite people to give me a thumbs up if that's something they can live with. And then we move on to the T, which stands for take action. I talk about the importance of taking action after the workshop, because if they leave the workshop at the end, go, that was a great workshop, wasn't that awesome, we learnt lots of things, but don't actually do anything, the workshop has been interesting, but not that useful. So I give participants a heads up that at the end of the session, I'm going to invite them to make a commitment about one thing they will do or do differently as a result of the session. So that's take a bet on yourself. The wonderful thing about that activity is you can change the letter B to be anything. I most often use be open-minded, but you might want to be respectful, be kind, whatever is going to work for the situation you're in. Activity 2. This activity is called What a Great Human Looks Like. This is a fun activity that doubles as a connection activity as well as a way to shape up a group agreement. It works particularly well with young people, but I've also used it with a team of senior leadership. So really it can fit into any context. How this activity works is, to kick it off, I invite people to draw a picture of a person they really admire. This stretches people's comfort zones just a little bit. So I reassure them that the picture doesn't have to be gallery worthy, it doesn't have to be a lifelike picture, but just draw a picture of someone they admire. I show them my picture, which is always of my dad. My dad was the most generous, kind, patient, forgiving person I've ever met, and he is really someone that I admire. So I invite people to draw a picture of the person they admire, and then I invite them to write around the outside the characteristics that they really admire in that person. Here's my dad: forgiving, patient, generous, and kind. Once they have drawn their picture and thought about the characteristics they admire, I invite them to find a partner or get into groups of 3 or 4, and I give them time to share the story of the person they admire. Why is that person important to them, and what are the characteristics that they admire in that person? That's a great way to connect. It gets a little bit personal. People share stories about people that are important to them, and it gets people in a great mood. Then we popcorn back into the room. At this point, I'm not so much looking for the stories, but I'm looking for the characteristics that people admire in others. As people are sharing those things back, I am writing them on the whiteboard or writing them on a flip chart so that we get a collection of all the things people admire in others. Once we've gathered those together, I can say, by the looks of this list, I think we can all agree that this is what a good human looks like. Am I right in assuming that we'd all like to be good humans today? Most often there's a little bit of a chuckle. And I suggest that we use this list, the characteristics we really admire, as our group agreement about how we'll show up for each other. Now, of course, they're going to agree with the list because they're words that they came up with themselves, and it really is what a good human looks like. Activity 3 is called Leave and Bring. And this is really an acknowledgement that people show up at workshops in all sorts of different states, and that if we want to show up in a way that is helpful for the group, we really need to be intentional about what we're bringing to the room and what we're choosing to leave at the door. So this activity happens in 2 parts. The first part is I invite people to reflect on anything they're carrying that they know is not going to be helpful in the space. It might be that they had an argument with their partner that morning and they're still carrying a bit of resentment or frustration, and they're unable to be fully present because that's taking up their brain space. Or it might be that they acknowledge they've brought in some baggage around the last workshop and what happened there, and they're not able to really contribute with a clean space. So I invite them to think about what that thing might be for them, and I reassure them that they won't need to share it out loud, but that we are going to do an activity that lets them leave it out in the hallway, metaphorically and literally. So what happens is I invite them to write down the thing they want to leave at the door on a piece of paper, and then I give anyone who wants to share the opportunity to do so before gathering up all of the paper, popping it in a basket, putting a lid on it, and literally taking it outside of the room. I assure people that if they want to pick up those problems, challenges, attitudes, mindsets when they leave, they're more than welcome to, but for now, they've made a commitment to take it outside. That's part one, the what are we leaving at the door. The second part of this activity is what are you bringing to the room? What attitudes, mindsets, actions, behaviors do you want to be intentional about bringing into this space? I get people to think about it for a minute or so on their own, and then I invite them to write it on a piece of cardboard that they can use as a nameplate. They can put it in front of them in the seat that they are sitting. What's interesting about this is all sorts of compassionately honest things show up. I remember working with a team a few years ago now where the team leader had been in the organisation for nearly 30 years. She acknowledged that she had some pretty strongly held beliefs about how things should and shouldn't be done because she'd just been there for such a long time. When we did this exercise and we invited people to say what will they bring to the room, she wrote on the card a willingness not to say yeah but. Like I'm not going to yeah but any ideas today. You could see the relief on the rest of her team's faces almost instantly. So by putting that onto the cards and putting it in front of the person, it's a reminder not just to the rest of the team what they have committed to doing, but it's a reminder to that person as well. So every time this team leader went to say, yeah, but, she went, oops, I'm sorry, I know that's what I'm committed to. So this kind of group agreement means not everyone's living by the same rules, but you're making an agreement for yourself about how you need to show up for others. If you like these activities, then you'll want to check out this free book, which you can get from my website. It's full of 45 ideas to build connection and spark conversation in a group setting. And there's heaps more ways to shape up group agreements in there. You can find it on my website. The link is in the description below. Go check it out.